She was just a girl, 20 summers old, standing at the edge of the world. Her name was Morning Star, and her world was about to end. The Montana plains in 1851 were a sea of grass, endless and unforgiving. Her people, the River Cree, followed the buffalo, lived with the seasons. It was the only life she'd ever known. But the whispers on the wind weren't about the coming winter anymore. They were whispers of war, of the Blackfeet. Her father, Chief Grey Wolf, found her there, his face a mask of worry. "The council gathers," he said, his voice like stones grinding together. "We must speak." She followed him. The elders were already there, their faces grim, their silence heavy. The air was thick with fear. For generations the Cree and the Blackfeet had been enemies. Their blood soaked the same earth. Their hatred was as old as the mountains. But things were changing. "Our scouts have returned," Grey Wolf announced, his voice echoing in the sudden quiet. "The Blackfeet grow stronger. Their raiding parties push deeper. We cannot survive another winter of fighting." He was right. They were losing. The women knew it. The children knew it. The warriors would never say it, but they knew it too. Morning Star's hands, usually steady as she worked a piece of hide, were trembling. Her father had always listened to her, valued her mind. "What options are left?" she asked, her voice quiet but clear. An old elder, White Crow, spoke. "They have sent a messenger." A messenger? From the Blackfeet? That had never happened before. "They propose a treaty," he said. "Peace." The word hung in the air, strange and unbelievable. Peace with the Blackfeet? It was like asking the wolf to lie down with the deer. A warrior, his arm covered in fresh scars from their last skirmish, spat on the ground. "What terms?" Chief Grey Wolf didn't look at the warrior. He didn't look at the elders. He looked at his daughter, and in his eyes she saw her own doom. "They request a bond of blood," he said, the words catching in his throat. "A marriage." The silence that followed was absolute. The wind died. The birds stopped singing. Morning Star could hear the frantic pounding of her own heart. "My daughter," her father whispered, his pain a knife in her chest. "They ask for you." Her. To marry their greatest warrior. A man whose name was a curse on the lips of every Cree. A killer. A monster. "They ask for you to marry Swift Arrow." The world tilted. The faces of the elders blurred. Swift Arrow. His name was a legend, a nightmare whispered around campfires. They said he was invincible, that he moved like the wind and struck like lightning. They said he had killed more Cree than any warrior alive, and now he was to be her husband. "I have never even seen him," she managed to say, her voice a ghost of its usual self. "He is their champion," White Crow offered, as if that were a comfort. "His father was a chief. The union would bring great honor." Honor? What good was honor in a cage? That night she fled to the river, the only place she could breathe. The moon painted silver streaks on the black water, but she saw no beauty in it. She saw only the reflection of a future she did not want. The fate of her people rested on her shoulders, a weight so heavy it threatened to crush her. A twig snapped behind her. "You should not be out here alone." She turned. It was her cousin, Running Elk. They had grown up as brother and sister. He knew her better than anyone. "The camp suffocates me," she said, her voice raw. He sat beside her, skipping a stone across the water. "You can refuse," he said softly. "Father would not force you." She laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "And then what? More war? More of our warriors carried home on their shields? Our children starving because we cannot hunt in peace?" She looked at him, her eyes pleading for him to understand. "I have helped Mother wash the blood from the bodies of our friends, Running Elk. I have heard the wails of new widows. I cannot be the reason for more of it." "But a Blackfoot," he said, his voice full of the old hatred. "Their ways are not our ways. Their gods are not our gods. You will be an outcast, a stranger in your own home." "Perhaps," she whispered, her resolve hardening even as her heart broke. "This is the only way to make sure our people still have a home." But as she said the words, a cold dread washed over her. It wasn't just about leaving her home. It was about him. Swift Arrow. There were other stories about him. Not just of his prowess in battle. Stories of a darkness in him. A cruelty that went beyond the warrior's code. They said his first wife had died, mysteriously, and that no one in the Blackfeet tribe dared speak of it. 3 days later, they came. The Blackfeet delegation. Their horses were powerful. Their gear was rich with beads and eagle feathers. They rode with an arrogance that set every Cree warrior's teeth on edge. And at their head was him. Swift Arrow. He was taller than she'd imagined, his shoulders broad, his face a mask of stone. His eyes were dark, intense, and they swept over the Cree camp with a look of cold assessment. Disdain, even. When his gaze finally landed on her, she felt it like a physical blow. But she did not look away. She would not show fear. Not to him. The chiefs met. Words were spoken. A pipe was smoked. The terms were laid out again. Shared hunting grounds. A mutual defense pact. And the price. Her. She was presented to him like a prized horse. He gave a curt nod. He did not speak a single word to her. He did not even truly look at her. He looked through her, as if she were nothing more than a piece of the treaty, an object to be claimed. The sun began to bleed across the horizon when they were finally left alone, standing a short distance from the watchful eyes of both camps. "You are afraid," he said. His voice was deep, guttural. He spoke a broken form of her language, as if the words themselves tasted foul in his mouth. "I am cautious," she corrected him, her chin held high, as any sane person would be, when sent to live among their enemies. A flicker of something, surprise, annoyance, crossed his face. "You have a sharp tongue for a woman. And you are quick to judge for a man they call wise," she shot back. This time, she was sure of it. A glint of something that might have been respect appeared in his eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it came. "Our people have hated each other for generations," he said, his gaze turning to the mountains that marked the edge of his territory. "Do you truly believe one ceremony can change that?" "I believe my people will starve if it does not," she said simply. He looked back at her then, and the coldness in his eyes was chilling. "I will honor the treaty. You will be my wife. You will have food, and a lodge, and protection." He paused, and his next words were a clear threat. "But you will not be my family. You will be Cree, and you will not forget your place." He was telling her she was a prisoner, a hostage to ensure the peace. Nothing more. The rumors about his first wife came flooding back. Had she forgotten her place? Morning Star looked at the hard, cruel face of the man who would be her husband, and a terrifying thought took root in her mind. This wasn't a treaty to bring peace. It was a trap. And she was the bait. The wedding was a strange, tense affair, held on the banks of a river that had seen more battles than fish. Her mother braided her hair, her hands trembling. "You carry our hope," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "But you are still Cree. Never forget who you are." It felt less like a blessing and more like a warning. Swift Arrow stood waiting, a figure of intimidating power. He wore a necklace of grizzly bear claws. Each claw, she knew, represented a kill. Not an animal, a man. Hands were bound. Prayers were offered in 2 languages that fought each other in the air. And just like that, she was his. She was the property of the Blackfeet. The journey to his camp was 3 days of suffocating silence. He rode beside her, a remote and imposing guard. The land grew harsher, more rugged, mirroring the man himself. "Those are the backbone of the world," he said once, gesturing to the distant, jagged mountains. "Our home." It sounded like a threat. His camp was huge, sprawling, and filled with faces that watched her with open suspicion. Whispers followed her as she walked through the camp, and the words she could understand were not welcoming. Cree. Enemy. Spy. His lodge was large, filled with the pelts of animals and painted hides depicting his victories in battle. Victories against her people. "This is your home now," he said, the words empty of warmth. That night, they held a feast. She sat beside him, a doll on display. Warriors and elders approached, but not to welcome her. They stared, their eyes hard, their expressions unreadable. They were judging her, testing her. An older woman with kind eyes finally approached. "I am Singing Bird," she said in halting Cree, "Swift Arrow's mother." The words of welcome were a balm, but the relief was short-lived. Later, Swift Arrow leaned close, his breath hot on her ear. "My mother lost her family in a Cree raid when she was a child," he said, his voice low and menacing. "She speaks your tongue to honor the treaty. Do not mistake it for affection." He was isolating her, making sure she knew she had no allies here, not even his own mother. The weeks that followed were a living nightmare. The women were cold, the warriors hostile. She was given the worst chores, the scraps of food. She was an enemy in their midst, and they never let her forget it. Swift Arrow was a ghost in their shared lodge. He left before sunrise and returned long after dark. They slept under the same roof, but were separated by a chasm of silence and distrust. He never touched her. He barely spoke to her. One night, she couldn't take the silence any longer. "Do you regret this?" she asked, her voice shaking. "This treaty? This marriage?" He looked up from the arrow he was sharpening, his eyes flat and hard. "The treaty serves its purpose." "I didn't ask about the treaty," she snapped, her frustration boiling over. "I asked about us." He stood up and walked toward her, his shadow swallowing her in the firelight. He stopped just inches from her, forcing her to crane her neck to look up at him. "There is no us," he said, his voice a low growl. "You are Cree. I am Blackfoot. You are here to ensure my people are not attacked. That is all." He was using her, holding her as a guarantee against her father's actions. But there was something more. A deep, personal hatred in his eyes that went beyond tribal enmity. "What did my people do to you?" she whispered, searching his face for an answer. "Why do you hate me so much?" For a moment, his mask of indifference cracked. She saw a flash of raw, agonizing pain. It was so intense it made her gasp. "Your people," he hissed, his voice breaking with a fury that stunned her, "killed my wife." The air left her lungs, his first wife, the one no one spoke of. "They killed her," he repeated, his eyes burning into hers. "A Cree war party, led by a warrior known for his cruelty. They raided a hunting camp. She was—" He choked on the word. "Defenseless." Suddenly it all made sense. The coldness, the distance, the hatred. He didn't just see her as a Cree. He saw her as a replacement for the woman he had loved, a woman her people had stolen from him. "They told me she died," Morningstar said, her mind reeling. "But not how." "Of course not," he sneered. "Why would they speak of their butchery?" He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "Every time I look at you, I see her face. And I see the faces of the men who killed her. So do not speak to me of us. You are a ghost in my lodge, a reminder of what I have lost." He turned and strode out into the night, leaving her alone with the horrifying truth. This marriage wasn't just a political arrangement. For him, it was a punishment, a daily torment, and she was the instrument of his revenge. The world had shrunk to the size of this lodge, a prison of furs and silence. Every object, a painted shield, a bundle of arrows, seemed to mock her, reminders of a life and a love that was not hers. Swift Arrow's grief was a palpable thing, a third person in their home. He looked at her and saw a ghost. She was living in a dead woman's home, wearing a dead woman's name, wife. She tried to learn the Blackfeet ways, to find some small place for herself. Singing Bird, his mother, continued to teach her the language, her kindness a small, flickering light in the darkness. But even that was tainted now. Was her kindness pity? Or was it a duty, performed for a son lost in his own despair? The other women were worse. They saw the chasm between Morning Star and their great warrior. They whispered that the Cree woman was a curse, that her presence dishonored the memory of his first wife, Fawn Leap. The name felt like a stone in her mouth. Fawn Leap. She began to hear it everywhere. Fawn Leap had the most skilled hands for beadwork. Fawn Leap's laughter could charm the birds from the trees. Fawn Leap was beloved. Morning Star was not. She was the enemy. The replacement. One day, a young woman named Little Owl sneered at her clumsy attempt to scrape a hide. Fawn Leap could scrape 3 hides in the time it takes you to ruin one, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Shame burned in Morning Star's cheeks. She wanted to scream that she was the daughter of a chief, that her skills were praised among the Cree. But here, they were nothing. She was nothing. She sought out Singing Bird, desperate for a connection. "Tell me of her," she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Fawn Leap. The older woman's face softened with a sad smile. She was like the first flower of spring, bright and full of life. She looked at Morning Star, her eyes full of a sorrow that seemed to go beyond just the loss of a daughter-in-law. "My son. He has not been the same since she was taken." There was something in her tone, a hesitation that pricked at Morning Star's curiosity. "The raid," Morning Star prodded gently. "What happened?" Singing Bird's eyes darted around, as if afraid of being overheard. "It was a dark day. A Cree war party. They were not our usual enemies. They were brutal, merciless." She paused, lowering her voice. "There is a warrior among your people. They call him Stone Hand. It was his party." Stone Hand. Morning Star knew the name. A renegade. A man who followed his own bloody path, often defying the orders of the chiefs. Her father had tried to exile him, but he had too many followers. He was a stain on the honor of the Cree people. So it was him. It wasn't a sanctioned raid by her tribe. It was a rogue killer. But how could she explain that to Swift Arrow? To him, a Cree was a Cree. That night, she decided she had to try. She couldn't live like this, suffocating under the weight of his hatred. She waited for him in the lodge. When he entered, she stood before him, blocking his path. "The man who killed your wife," she said, her voice steady despite the hammering in her chest. "His name is Stone Hand." Swift Arrow froze, his face hardening. "I know his name." "He is a renegade," she pressed on. "An outcast. He does not act for my father or for the Cree Council. He acts only for himself." "And yet he is Cree," Swift Arrow growled. "He wears Cree paint and carries a Cree lance." "It does not matter," she cried, her control finally snapping. "You are punishing me for the actions of one evil man. I am not him. My family is not him." "You are his people," he roared, his rage exploding to the surface. He grabbed her by the shoulders, his grip like iron. "You are the blood of those who left her to die in the dirt." "And what would you have me do?" she sobbed, tears streaming down her face. "I cannot bring her back. I am trapped here just as you are. I am trying to build a bridge, and you are trying to tear it down stone by stone." His eyes, burning with rage, stared into hers. For a long, tense moment, she saw the battle raging within him, the warrior versus the man, the hatred versus the flicker of something else he had never admitted. Then, his grip loosened. He stumbled back, as if her words had physically struck him. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time she thought he didn't see the ghost of Fawn Leap. He saw her, Morning Star, a woman as trapped by this treaty as he was. He said nothing. He simply turned and walked out of the lodge again, leaving the scent of pine and cold rage in his wake. But something had changed. The wall between them had cracked. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A few days later, a crisis erupted. A sickness, a terrible fever began to sweep through the camp. It started with the children, then spread to the elders. The Blackfeet healers were powerless against it. Their chants and sacred herbs did nothing. Panic began to set in. Morning Star recognized the symptoms. It was a lung fever, one she had seen before. Her grandmother, a great healer among the Cree, had taught her the remedies. A specific combination of willow bark, yarrow, and a rare root that grew only near the river bends. She knew she could help. But would they let her? She was the Cree witch, the bad omen. Her medicine would be seen as poison. She watched a young mother weep as her child's breath grew ragged. She couldn't stand by and do nothing. She went to Singing Bird. "I can help," she said. "I know this sickness. My people have a cure." Singing Bird looked at her, her face a mixture of hope and fear. "The elders will not allow it. They do not trust you." "Then let me try in secret," Morning Star pleaded. "Give me one child, the one who is closest to death. If I fail, I have done no more harm than your own healers. If I succeed—" The risk was enormous. If the child died, they would kill her. There would be no trial. Singing Bird looked toward her own grandchildren, their faces flushed with fever. She made a decision. "Come," she said, her voice grim. "My daughter's youngest son. He will not last the night." All night, Morning Star worked by the firelight in a hidden lodge. She brewed the tea, forcing the bitter liquid between the boy's lips. She bathed his head with cool water and chanted the old Cree healing songs her grandmother had taught her. Swift Arrow appeared in the doorway, a silent specter. He watched her, his expression unreadable. He did not help, but he did not stop her. He simply stood guard, his presence a silent, heavy question. Toward dawn, the boy's fever broke. His breathing eased. He opened his eyes. Singing Bird fell to her knees, weeping with relief. She grabbed Morning Star's hand and held it to her cheek. "You saved him," she whispered. "You saved him." The news spread through the camp like wildfire. The Cree woman's medicine was powerful. One by one, hesitantly at first, then with desperate urgency, the other families brought their sick to her. For 3 days and 3 nights, she did not sleep. She brewed her remedies, soothed the suffering, and fought the fever that was trying to claim the tribe. Swift Arrow stayed by her side the entire time, a silent shadow, fetching water, gathering wood, his eyes never leaving her. On the 4th morning, the last of the sick was out of danger. The camp, which had been shrouded in the silence of death, was filled with the sounds of life again. Exhausted, Morning Star finally stumbled back to her own lodge. Swift Arrow followed her. She collapsed onto a pile of furs, too tired to move. He stood over her for a long moment. Then he did something that shocked her. He knelt beside her. He took a damp cloth and began to gently wipe the sweat and grime from her face. His touch was hesitant, unsure, but it was gentle. "You saved my people," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. It wasn't gratitude. It was something more. Awe. "They are my people now, too," she whispered, her eyes fluttering closed. As she drifted into an exhausted sleep, she felt him pull a fur blanket over her. He hesitated, then his hand rested on her shoulder for just a moment. It was the first time he had touched her without anger. But their small moment of peace was about to be shattered. A warrior came running into the camp, his face pale with terror. "A hunting party has been found," he gasped. "Slaughtered, all of them." He looked at Swift Arrow, his eyes wild with fear and hatred. It was a Cree war party. They left a sign. Swift Arrow was on his feet in an instant, his face once again a mask of stone. The brief warmth between them vanished, replaced by the icy chill of war. He looked down at Morning Star, and the suspicion was back in his eyes, colder and harder than ever before. "It seems," he said, his voice dripping with venom, "that your people have strange ways of showing their gratitude." The camp was a hornet's nest of rage and grief. The bodies of the slain hunters were brought in, and the wails of their families echoed through the valley. The attack was brutal, a massacre. And the symbol left behind was undeniable, the mark of the River Cree. All eyes turned to Morning Star. She was the enemy within. The healer one moment, the harbinger of death the next. The women who had brought her their children now spat at her feet. The warriors who had watched her work now gripped their weapons as she passed. She was a prisoner again, confined to her lodge. 2 guards were posted outside. Swift Arrow was gone, leading a war party to track the killers. He hadn't spoken another word to her, but his eyes had said everything. He believed it. He believed her people had betrayed him, betrayed the treaty. He believed she was a part of it. She was alone, truly alone, surrounded by 100 enemies who wanted her dead. Singing Bird was the only one who dared to visit, smuggling her food. "It wasn't my father," Morning Star insisted, her voice desperate. "He would never break the treaty. It must be Stone Hand again." "The warriors do not care about names," Singing Bird said sadly. "They only see the mark of the Cree. They only see you." Days turned into a week. The fear and tension in the camp grew thicker with every passing hour. They were preparing for war, sharpening blades, fletching arrows, painting their faces, preparing to ride against her people. Then, one night, she was shaken awake. A figure stood over her in the darkness. She almost screamed, but a hand clamped over her mouth. "Be quiet!" a familiar voice whispered in Cree. Her eyes widened. Running Elk. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, pushing his hand away once he let go. "I've come to save you," he said, his face urgent in the dim light. "The war parties are gathering. My father sent me. We have to get you out of here before they kill you." Relief washed over her, so potent it made her dizzy. He had come for her. Her people had not forgotten her. "How did you get past the guards?" "They are asleep," he said quickly, pulling her to her feet. "I was able to get close. Come, we have horses hidden." He was her cousin, her brother. She trusted him completely. She followed him out of the lodge, moving like a shadow through the sleeping camp. Everything he said made sense. Her life was in danger. Her father would of course send someone to rescue her. They reached the edge of the camp, where 2 horses were tied in a thicket of trees. They mounted quickly and rode away, the sounds of the Blackfeet camp fading behind them. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of hope. She was going home. They rode hard through the night, not stopping until the sun began to rise. They found a secluded canyon to rest the horses and themselves. "Thank you," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "You risked your life for me." "Always," he said, giving her a small smile. But there was something in his eyes she couldn't read. A nervousness. "How did you know they would attack the hunters?" she asked. "Did our scouts see Stonehand's war party?" Running Elk shifted uncomfortably. We have had men watching the borders. We knew tensions were high." It was a vague answer. A prickle of unease ran down her spine. "The guards," she said, thinking back. "You said they were asleep. How?" "I used a powder," he said. "A sleeping powder given to me by our shaman." It made sense, and yet it didn't. How could he have gotten close enough to 2 wary guards to use a sleeping powder without being seen? The story felt thin. "Running Elk," she said slowly, her eyes searching his face. "Something is wrong. Tell me the truth." He wouldn't meet her gaze. He stared at the ground, his jaw tight. "The truth is, you are in danger, and I am taking you home." "That's not the truth," she insisted, her voice rising. "That's a story. How did you get past the guards?" He remained silent, and then a horrible, sickening realization began to dawn. It started as a whisper in the back of her mind, then grew into a roar. The sleeping guards, the convenient timing of his arrival, his knowledge of the attack. "You didn't sneak past the guards, did you?" she whispered, her blood turning to ice. "There were no guards." He finally looked at her, and his face was a mask of guilt and desperation. "They let you in," she breathed, the words catching in her throat. "The Blackfeet. They let you take me. Morning Star, listen to me." "No!" she screamed, scrambling away from him. "Why? Why would they let me go?" The only answer was one so monstrous she could barely form the thought. They would only let her go if they wanted her gone, if her escape served a purpose, to break the treaty, to give them a reason to go to war with the full blame resting on the Cree who had stolen the chief's wife. Her escape wasn't a rescue. It was a justification for war. And Running Elk hadn't saved her. He had kidnapped her. He was working with them. "Why?" she cried, tears of betrayal streaming down her face. "Why would you do this to our people?" "Our people?" he spat, his face twisting into a sneer she had never seen before. "Our people are weak. Your father is a fool, trading his own daughter for a worthless piece. We need to fight. We need to drive the Blackfeet from these lands forever." He was working with a faction inside the Blackfeet camp, a faction that wanted war as much as he did. They had orchestrated the attack on the hunters, using Stonehand's renegades and planting the Cree symbol. And now they had orchestrated her escape. By the time the sun was high, the Blackfeet would claim the Cree had broken the peace, stolen the bride, and declared war. It was a perfect trap. And her own cousin, the boy she had grown up with, had led her right into it. "You've doomed us all," she whispered in horror. "No," he said, grabbing her arm, his grip bruising. "I have saved us." He dragged her toward the horses, but before he could force her to mount, the thunder of hooves echoed through the canyon. They were surrounded. A dozen Blackfeet warriors appeared on the ridge above them, bows drawn, arrows aimed at their hearts. And leading them, his face a storm of fury and betrayal, was Swift Arrow. He had not gone to track the killers. He had been tracking her. His eyes locked on her, then on Running Elk's hand gripping her arm. The rage in his expression was terrifying. He didn't see a rescue. He saw an elopement. He saw his Cree wife running away with her Cree lover. He saw the ultimate betrayal. "So," Swift Arrow's voice boomed across the canyon, cold and deadly. "The truth is revealed. The healer is a whore, and the treaty is a lie." The world stood still. The arrows of a dozen warriors were pointed at her heart. Her cousin was a traitor, and her husband believed she had betrayed him in the most intimate way possible. "It's not what you think," she screamed, her voice raw with desperation. "He's lying. They planned this." Swift Arrow's face was unreadable, carved from granite. He dismounted, walking slowly toward them, his hand never leaving the hilt of his knife. "You run from my camp in the dead of night with him. What else am I to think? He is my cousin." "He holds you like a man holds a woman he plans to keep," Swift Arrow countered, his eyes burning with a jealous fire that shocked her. This wasn't the cold fury of a betrayed chief. This was personal. Running Elk saw his chance. He pushed Morning Star toward Swift Arrow. "She came with me willingly," he shouted. "She hates you. She hates your people. She begged me to take her away." It was the perfect lie, confirming every suspicion, every fear Swift Arrow had ever harbored about her. "Liar!" Morning Star shrieked, lunging at Running Elk, but he shoved her to the ground. Swift Arrow's eyes narrowed. He looked from Running Elk's triumphant sneer to Morning Star's tear-streaked, furious face. For a fraction of a second, he hesitated, and in that moment of hesitation, she saw it. A sliver of doubt. He didn't fully believe it. The woman who had saved his people, who had stood up to him, who had shown no fear. Would she run like a thief in the night? It didn't fit. "There's a faction in your camp," she gasped, scrambling to her feet. "They want war. They worked with him. They killed your hunters." "More lies," Running Elk spat. "She is trying to save her own skin." "Then why?" Swift Arrow asked, his voice dangerously quiet, his gaze fixed on Running Elk. "Did you not simply kill the guards?" Running Elk froze. It was the one question he couldn't answer. A rescuer, a true warrior, would have fought his way out. He wouldn't have relied on a sleeping powder or a convenient escape. I did not wish for more bloodshed," Running Elk stammered. It was a weak answer, and everyone knew it. Swift Arrow took another step forward. "My wife saved my son's life. She saved my mother's grandchildren. She worked until she collapsed to save a people who despised her. That is not the act of a woman who runs." He turned his gaze to Morning Star, and the fire in his eyes was different now. It was a question. "Tell me what happened." And so she did. The story poured out of her. The setup, the fake rescue, Running Elk's confession, the plot to start a war. As she spoke, the pieces clicked into place for Swift Arrow. The attack on the hunters had been too clean, too deliberate. The tracks had been too easy to find. It was all a performance. His gaze shifted to one of the warriors on the ridge, a man named Stoneheart, the brother of one of the hunters who had been killed. He had been the loudest voice calling for war, the most vocal in his hatred for Morning Star. And right now, Stoneheart's face was a mask of panic. Swift Arrow had his traitor. "Seize him!" Swift Arrow commanded, pointing not at Running Elk, but at Stoneheart. "And him," he added, his voice like ice, nodding at Running Elk. Stoneheart's men, loyal to him, drew their own weapons. The canyon became a standoff, Blackfeet against Blackfeet. "He is the chief's son-in-law," Stoneheart yelled, pointing at Running Elk. "This Cree witch has poisoned Swift Arrow's mind." But the other warriors hesitated. They had seen Morning Star's courage during the fever. They had seen Swift Arrow's dawning realization. They trusted their war chief more than they trusted the hot-headed Stoneheart. Running Elk, seeing his plan unravel, made a desperate move. He pulled a knife and lunged, not at Swift Arrow, but at Morning Star. He would silence her for good. But Swift Arrow was faster. He moved like a blur, a predator intercepting its prey. He met Running Elk's charge, and the canyon echoed with the sickening crunch of bone as he disarmed him and slammed him to the ground. The fight was over before it began. Stoneheart's warriors, seeing their leader's ally defeated so easily, threw down their weapons. It was finished. The conspiracy was broken. Swift Arrow stood over the gasping Running Elk, his knife at the traitor's throat. He looked at Morning Star, his eyes asking the question. This was her blood, her family. Did she want vengeance? She looked at the cousin she had loved, his face twisted with hatred and defeat, and she felt nothing but pity. "He has brought enough death," she said, her voice heavy. "Let our fathers decide his fate." Swift Arrow nodded, a sign of respect. He pulled Running Elk to his feet and handed him over to his warriors. He did the same with Stoneheart. Then he walked to Morning Star. He stood before her, the dust of the canyon swirling around them. The anger was gone from his face, replaced by a deep, gut-wrenching shame. He had doubted her. He had called her a whore. He had been ready to believe the very worst of her, because of his own past, his own pain. "Morning Star," he began, his voice rough. You thought I betrayed you," she finished for him, her voice quiet. She was not angry. She was just tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of being misunderstood. "My grief, it blinded me," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "The memory of Fawn Leap. I let it poison everything. I am not her," she said softly. "I can never be her." "I know," he said, and the admission seemed to cost him everything. He took a hesitant step closer. "I do not want you to be. I want—" He struggled with the words he had never spoken. "I want you." He reached out, his hand gently touching her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. It was a touch full of apology, of regret, and of a fragile new beginning. In the harsh light of the Montana sun, surrounded by their enemies and their allies, the warrior and the healer finally saw each other for what they were. Not Cree or Blackfoot, not husband and wife by treaty, but a man and a woman who had, against all odds, found their way to each other. But the war they had averted was only the beginning. A new threat was coming from the east, a threat that would not care about their treaties or their fragile peace, a threat that would try to sweep them all from the land, and they would have to face it together. They returned to the Blackfeet camp not as chief and suspected traitor, but as a united front. The truth of Stoneheart's conspiracy sent shockwaves through the tribe. He and his co-conspirators were exiled, a punishment worse than death. Running Elk was sent back to the Cree, a prisoner for his own chief to judge, a living symbol of the broken trust between not just two tribes, but two families. The path to war had been closed, but the wounds were deep. The biggest change, however, was within the chief's lodge. The silence was gone, replaced by conversation. The distance was gone, replaced by a cautious intimacy. Swift Arrow began to talk, truly talk. He spoke of Fawn Leap, not with the bitter rage of before, but with the quiet sorrow of a man mourning a memory. He explained that she had not been killed in a raid, as he had led Morning Star to believe. She had been stolen, taken by Stone Hand's renegades for ransom, and had died trying to escape. The shame of not being able to protect her had twisted his grief into a weapon he had aimed at everyone, especially himself. In sharing his pain, he finally began to heal. And Morning Star, in listening, began to understand the man behind the warrior's mask. She, in turn, told him of her life, her dreams, the weight of being a chief's daughter. They were no longer two enemies sharing a fire. They were two people building a home. Slowly, tentatively, their political marriage became a real one. He taught her the Blackfeet way to hunt, to ride. She showed him the Cree healing herbs he had never known. They found a balance, a blending of their two worlds. And one night, as a summer storm raged outside, he finally reached for her, not with duty or anger, but with a tenderness that spoke more than words ever could. In that moment, the last wall between them crumbled to dust. Spring came, and with it, news. Morning Star was with child, a child of both Cree and Blackfoot blood. It was a symbol of the new peace, a living embodiment of their union. The entire tribe celebrated. This child would be the bridge, the future. But the world was changing faster than they could adapt. White settlers, the Iron Horse, the men with paper treaties, they were no longer distant rumors. They were here. Government men arrived, speaking of reservations, of boundaries, of a new way of life that was no life at all for the people of the plains. They wanted to put fences on the sky. They do not understand, Swift Arrow said grimly, after a council with the white officials. They want us to farm land that was made for the buffalo. They want to separate the tribes, to draw lines on a map that will cut our world in half. The treaty they proposed was a dagger to the heart of the alliance Morning Star and Swift Arrow had built. The Cree would be sent to lands in the north, the Blackfeet to the west. The shared hunting grounds would be no more. The families that had begun to intermarry would be torn apart. "We cannot let this happen," Morning Star said, her hand on her swelling belly. "Our child deserves to know both peoples." Swift Arrow, now a respected chief not just for his strength but for his wisdom, was chosen to go to Fort Benton, to speak for the Blackfeet. "I am coming with you," Morning Star declared. "It is no place for a woman," he argued, "let alone one who is with child." "I am Cree by birth and Blackfoot by marriage," she said, her resolve firm. "Our son is both. If they speak of separating our peoples, then a voice that is both must be heard." He saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had defied him, that had saved his people, that had captured his heart. He agreed. The fort was a world of sharp angles and foreign tongues. White soldiers, officials in stiff collars, their wives in dresses like cages. The native leaders were treated with a thin veneer of respect that barely concealed their condescension. The talks went on for days. The government men were polite, but unyielding. Boundaries must be drawn. For administrative purposes. Finally, Swift Arrow rose to speak. Through an interpreter, he told them of the 5 years of peace, of the shared bloodlines, of the families that would be broken. He pointed to Morning Star. "My wife is the daughter of Chief Greywolf. Our child will be grandson to chiefs of both tribes. Where does he belong in your paper boundaries?" The official, a man named Henderson, had a simple, chilling answer. "The wife is considered to belong to her husband's tribe. The child will be Blackfoot." It was an erasure of half her identity, half her son's heritage. Before Swift Arrow could protest, Morning Star stood. She did not wait for an interpreter. She spoke in the English she had learned from traders, her voice clear and strong, silencing the entire room. "I am not a possession to be assigned," she said, her gaze locking with Henderson's. "I stand before you as both Cree and Blackfoot. My son is both. You speak of peace, but your pens create a new kind of war, A war against families, a war against identity. Your lines on paper cannot cut a child in half. A stunned silence fell over the room. Swift Arrow looked at her with pure, unadulterated pride. The white men were flustered, shocked into silence by this native woman who spoke their language with more passion and logic than they possessed. Her speech didn't win the war, but it won a crucial battle. The final treaty was still a bitter pill. Reservations were established, but a special provision was added, born from her words. A small corridor of land between the two territories, a shared space for families of mixed heritage, and the right for those with family on the other side to travel freely between the nations. It wasn't the freedom of their ancestors, but it was something. It was a future. They returned home to find their world already in motion, preparing for the move to the new lands. The grief for their lost way of life was heavy in the air. In the moon of ripening berries, she gave birth to a son. They took him out to greet his first sunrise, as was the tradition of both peoples. "What will we call him?" she asked, cradling the infant in her arms. Swift Arrow looked at his son, then at the sky, where the morning sun was breaking through the last of the night's storm clouds. "Two skies," he said, "for he is born of two peoples, and will live under the heavens of both." 5 years passed. Life on the reservation was hard. The buffalo were scarce, the government promises often broken. But the people endured. The bond between the Cree and the Blackfeet, forged in the corridor between their lands, grew stronger. Two skies grew, a boy as wild and bright as the plains themselves. He had his father's strength and his mother's wise eyes. He learned the stories of both tribes, the songs of both peoples. One evening, as the family sat outside their lodge, watching the sun set, the boy asked a question. "Father says I am Blackfoot. Grandmother says I am Cree. Which am I?" Swift Arrow pulled his son onto his lap. "You are two skies," he said softly. "You are the best of both. Others will try to make you choose to be one thing or the other. But your strength is that you do not have to. You are the bridge. You are the hope." Morning Star took her husband's hand, their fingers lacing together. She looked at her son, at the life she had built from a sentence of death, a marriage of hate. The path ahead was uncertain, but they would walk it together. "Tell me a story," Two Skies said, his voice sleepy. "Tonight," Morning Star said, pulling him close, "I will tell you a new story, about a Cree woman and a Blackfoot warrior who were told they had to be enemies, but who chose to be family instead." As she began to speak, telling the tale of their own impossible journey, she knew this was the one story that would be passed down, the one that would matter. A story that proved that even in a world of borders and boundaries, love could draw a map all its own. If you were moved by the story of Morning Star and Swift Arrow, and you believe that courage and love can build bridges where others build walls, hit that subscribe button. Let me know in the comments what part of their journey resonated with you the most. Thank you for watching.